McGuire joins us tonight from Rochester. Thanks for your time tonight.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Nick. Thanks again.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about the lawsuit that was filed today. You devote a lengthy period of time in the lawsuit to talk a little bit about how this law was passed in the Senate. I was there in the room. I believe you were there in the room, or you were in the Capitol when it passed, and it actually took a surprisingly short amount of time, a relatively short amount of time, to get this through.
Right. And that's because we were all expecting a long, open, deliberative process. But, you know, the more and more as time went on, we began to see this was a process that just the wheels were greased to go. Even people that don't agree with me on this issue, they're supporting same-sex marriage, like Senator Kevin Parker or Senator Neil Breslin. Both acknowledged there were speeches that they wanted to give on the floor and they were not given the opportunity. So it was certainly not the open and deliberative process that good government should have.
Right. Senator Parker even stormed off the floor of the Senate chamber after he was told that he could not speak. But you mentioned Senator Ruben Diaz, who attempted to speak against the bill, Ruben Diaz being a longstanding opponent of same-sex marriage, trying to speak on the bill. Actually, he was gavelled out by Lieutenant Governor Bob Duffy, who was presiding, saying that he couldn't speak as the same length as Senator Steve Saland, who voted yes on the bill, or other Democrats who had voted yes as well. But still, I mean, how is that grounds, though, for legal action? I mean, what law was broken there?
Well, we're looking at some of the issues, beyond even some of the issues you've described, open meetings violations. 32 senators constitute a quorum in the state Senate. Met with New York City Mayor Bloomberg, who is not a registered Republican, but is a registered independent who donated heavily to the Republicans' campaign coffers. We think there may be some violations of open meetings laws there. The people of New York should be concerned about a process that did not allow a proper vetting of the legislation. You know, we put a press release out even the day before we caught wind that this may be coming to the floor Thursday night of that week, warning the senators that, you know what, we have to have this language. We've got to see this religious freedoms amendment. When we asked to see it, we were told you won't see it until it hits the floor. That is not a fair and open democratic process, and we think there are violations here that the court should carefully consider.
Sure, but I don't believe the New York State Legislature, and this is something that drives journalists and reporters crazy, but I don't believe the New York State Legislature is actually covered under the open meetings law or the Freedom of Information law. You know, filing a FOIL doesn't really do much in the legislature. So, I mean, how does that fit in with the lawsuit if they're not covered under the open meetings law? For instance, we can't walk into their conferences.
I'll tell you what, if 32... You can't, but I'll tell you what, when they open the doors to a members-only conference to the Mayor Bloomberg, an independent, I think they've crossed a line there. He is not a registered Republican, he's a registered independent. We requested access to some of those meetings and were denied. You know, even the Friday of the vote, when the doors are supposed to be left open for access to the public and for lobbyists to deal with senators, we were denied access to Republican senators. Now, the Democratic side of the aisle was open, so it certainly wasn't a safety or security issue. It was a means of trying to keep us from having access to swing votes at a critical time. That is not an open and deliberative process, and we're anxious to have our day in court to talk about these issues.
Okay. You also mentioned in the lawsuit that there was, or suggest in the lawsuit, that there was a quid pro quo for Mayor Bloomberg, who donated the maximum to the Republican senators who voted yes on the gay marriage bill. What evidence do you have that this was, you know, in exchange for that vote? Because that's a pretty serious charge.
Well, the evidence will be brought out in court as we talk about that. I hate to tip our hand too early, but, you know, one of the things we're going to be looking at very carefully here will be the intent. For Mayor Bloomberg to go into a private, closed-door meeting with these senators to do what he does, and then to have the vote taken and turn around and write the checks Monday morning after the Friday night vote. I'm not so sure there's much difference in the timing of that if the intent was there before. So we're anxious to see the courts take a look at those issues as well.
Sure, but Mayor Bloomberg also donated to Senator Martin Golden, who introduced a bill that would actually, did the reverse of what the same-sex marriage bill. It actually would not recognize out-of-state same-sex marriages. He did this earlier in the year when that bill, when the same-sex marriage bill wasn't voted on. So, I mean, you know, if he's donating to people who voted yes for same-sex marriage and donating to people who voted no on same-sex marriage, I mean, doesn't that give you pause about the idea of a quid pro quo being exchanged here?
No, it doesn't. In fact, what it tells me is that Mayor Bloomberg is pretty comfortable throwing his cash around on a variety of his interests.
Well, he's a very rich guy.
I think
sure.
the court should take a look at. Absolutely, yeah. And so I think the intent is going to be there. I mean, there were certainly statements made before the vote was taken from Mayor Bloomberg and others very close to him about his intention in some of these things, and then afterwards to write these checks in that manner. And not just individuals, but even as a Senate Republican conference, there was a large donation made. These are things that we'll be anxious to see the courts to rule on. I think it's time that New Yorkers have that shroud of secrecy pulled back, and they can let people see what's really going on, how legislation is passed. Today the issue is same-sex marriage, and I understand that, and it's near and dear to me and why we're bringing the lawsuit. But you know what? It could be any issue, and I think it's something that all New Yorkers should care about. This is something we've vetted candidates when we talk with them about, their position on good government issues like independent redistricting and other issues, and then to now have this issue come out in this manner, the process and the procedure bothers us. This is something that should bother all New Yorkers, and I'm anxious to have that day in court.
Sure, but you mentioned, just to back up a little bit, you mentioned Mayor Bloomberg supporting the Senate Republicans. That's something he's done for years now in trying to first get them back into the majority and now, I guess, keep their very narrow two-seat majority. Again, just to go back to the whole idea of evidence and a sign that there was this, I mean, what specific statements did he make to suggest? I even have been in news conferences where Mayor Bloomberg was asked, did you promise any help or promise any support? He didn't seem to make any implicit or explicit statements in that regard. Is there any statements that you can point to?
Well, I'm going to leave the specifics to our legal team, and we have arranged not only the complaint, but also the exhibits are on our website at albanyupdate.com if folks would like to check out what we have listed there. And as this case progresses, I'm sure we're going to hear much more about all of these charges and be able to go down that road. But I'm not the first person that's made this allegation either. We're hearing this even from people I've talked to today, reporters that are raising concerns over this, things they have cited and concerns that are raised. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds in the days to come.
Okay, and what did you think? And I was, like we said earlier, I was there the night, and so were you, when this was voted on. One thing that did happen was the protesters were taken out to outside of the Senate Republican offices to the, I believe, right by the $1 Million staircase in the state capitol building. State troopers said, and these were folks who were for and against the legalization bill, state troopers at the time said that this was for safety and over safety concerns. This was something done over during the state budget debate as well. Did you get that same sense from state troopers that this was a safety issue above all else, a security issue?
Well, as we talked to particularly the Sergeant at Arms, they indicated to us this was going to be applied to everybody, but it wasn't equally applied, if you will. There was access to Senate Democrats. And there was certainly that aisleway was open. If this was truly a situation of safety and concern for state senators, don't you think that would apply to both Republicans and Democrats equally? It did not. It only applied to one side of the hall as the votes were being locked down the final hours before this vote. And I think that ought to raise some concerns, again, by people that are looking at a legislative process that they were shut out of.
Sure, and just to go back to one part of your lawsuit here, you write that, or at least the lawsuit alleges, the governor's violation of the constitutionally mandated 3-day review period before the legislature votes on a bill by unjustifiably issuing a message of necessity. What was unjustifiable about the message of necessity, which we should say it requires every bill in the legislature requires a 3-day, what they call an aging process, where bills are placed on a lawmaker's desk for 3 days and then they can vote on it. This bill was not done in that fashion. He issued a message of necessity, I believe, for the Senate to vote on this measure after the amendments were added to it. But what was unjustifiable about it?
Well, I will tell you that the message of necessity is being abused in the legislature today. It's being used for any piece of controversial legislation that our state senator, state assembly, or even the governor doesn't want to have properly vetted. And so you throw it on the floor so you can get it done in time for the 11 o'clock news. That is not the purpose of the message of necessity. If there is a dire emergency, if there is some situation why we cannot wait for the 3-day aging process, that's one thing. But even in the state assembly, they issued the message of necessity the week before. What was the need for the message of necessity? These are the issues I think the courts should be looking at, and people across New York should be concerned with a legislature that is ramming legislation through rather than properly vetting it.
Okay, Jason, we're almost out of time, but I just want to ask you one last thing before we go. You were here last week talking about a fund for municipal workers who are resigning rather than officiate at same-sex marriages. How is that fund going? How much money have you so far raised for this fund?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that. In fact, that's at couragefund.org, and we're really raising the funds to help out those town clerks, particularly Laura Fatusky, who, as a person of conviction, laid those concerns and said, I can't do this, so she had to resign her position. We think we should help her out. And we're encouraged. We're seeing $5, $10, $25 donations from all across the state, and some, frankly, from across the nation, that we're beginning to raise those thousands of dollars that we can begin to give towards Laura Fatusky. That's at couragefund.org.
How much have you raised so far? Can you tell us?
I haven't looked today, but somewhere in the neighborhood, I think it's $2,500 or something like that. So we're well on our way, and we're anxious to see this continue.
Okay. Reverend Jason McGuire of New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedom, thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay. Hey, Jason.